We're on? We're good? Okay, Erev Tov Rabotai. Good evening. Thank you for joining once again. Be'ezrat Hashem, like we said, unfortunately last week we had to postpone the shiur, but that was out of concerns for sakanat nefashot. So, Baruch Hashem, we were able to hold the shiur this week. Today we'll speak about a very, very important subject in kashrut, something that is close to everyone's heart, especially here in America. And the question becomes, what is the Halacha? We're going to have to define some terms tonight with regards to Chalav Yisrael, Chalav Akum, Chalav Stam, which is really not anywhere in the poskim, but it's just, it's a phrase that's commonly thrown around in the kashrut world. And after we explain all that, we'll have to understand where do Sfaradim fall into the larger scheme of things, Ashkenazim. So Be'ezrat Hashem na'aseh v'natzliach. So first and foremost, like we've been speaking about for several weeks, there's a very famous Mishnah in Masechet Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Hey, which lists several different things that the Chachamim said is asur, that the Chachamim prohibited. We spoke about bishul, we spoke about pat. There's something else in the Mishnah, which the Mishnah, it's actually in two different places in Masechet Avodah Zarah, two different Mishnayot. And it's important because it's a little bit different. One of the things that the Mishnah quotes is Chalav. The Chachamim made a gzerah that milk that was milked by a non-Jew is asur for a Jew to consume. Now, very interesting that this is different than any of the other things that we've previously discussed from the same Mishnah, bishul akum and pat akum, and all of the other things that the Mishnah discusses, because the Gemara clearly states that the one and only reason for why chalav akum should be asur is only because of shema yachilenu davar tameh. We're afraid over here, interestingly enough, everybody agrees over here that it's not because of chitun. And right, chitun we spoke about in previous weeks. Chitun means assimilation, getting too close to the goyim, and that comes through bishul, that comes through pat. But chalav, that's not what the Gemara says. The reason for chalav is because we are afraid that they will mix in, or they will use milk of a non-kosher animal, because we know the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Bechorot, hayotze min hatameh tameh. Anything that comes out of a non-kosher animal is also non-kosher. So there are plenty of non-kosher animals that give milk, right? Many, many female non-kosher animals, whether it's a female pig or a female camel or whatever it is, many of them give milk. This milk is non-kosher. Goyim are not limited to only kosher milk, and for that reason the Chachamim were afraid that they would either serve this kind of milk to a Jew or mix it in with milk that they are manufacturing. And that's why Chalav Akum is asur. Now, the basis for understanding the rest of the shiur, and we're going to refer back to this point, is what we have to understand with regards to Chalav Akum. Right, we're going to speak about all the different shitot. I'm sure everybody has some sort of background about Chalav Stam and about government and about all sorts of things, government regulated, all sorts of laws. What is the reason behind Chalav Akum, besides for we know that it's possible that they will mix in prohibited milk. That's for sure. But what kind of gezerah is it? What kind of enactment of the Chachamim is it? Where does it fall under? Is it A, there's two ways to look at a takanat Chachamim. When the Chachamim enact something, there's something that's called, right, any time that the Chachamim put something into play, any time that the Chachamim enacted something, it's for a certain ta'am, it's for a certain reason. Now, one way of looking at it is, nitbatla hatam, nitbatla gezerah. Once the reason for the enactment falls away, so the enactment falls away also. Or, there's another way to look at it among the poskim, is that there's something called davar shene'esar b'minyan, which means this is something that was forbidden by the Chachamim, something that was prohibited by the Chachamim, and no matter what happens, the enactment stays intact. Even if the reason for the enactment becomes obsolete, which means even if the reason for why the Chachamim decreed what they did no longer applies, the enactment still applies. Which is the words of the Gemara, En bet din yachol levatel divrei bet din chavero, ela im ken gadol mimenu bechokhma uvminyan. Which means, one bet din cannot undo the rulings of a previous bet din unless it is greater than them in wisdom and in number. Now, usually the way it goes, for a later bet din to do that, you already can't say that I'm greater than you in knowledge, because we know that the way the generations go, as the generations progress, what happens to the Chachamim? They become lower in level, right? That's the way it goes. So one bet din cannot undo the enactments of another. So which way shall we look at the Takanat Chachamim? Let's try to prove this one way or another from the words of the poskim. Now this idea that I just set forth is a tremendous machloket among the Rishonim, among the Acharonim, as I'll show you some.
Excuse me, could you give us some example of nitbatel tam, nitbatel gezerah?
There are examples lekan ulkan, but there's no better example than the situation at hand. That's why I want to start with that. The Bet Yosef brings down on the spot in Siman Kuf Tedvav in Yoreh De'ah, which is the laws of Chalav Akum. The Bet Yosef brings down, in the name of several poskim, in the name of Samak, Sefer Mitzvot Katan, Rabbeinu Yaakov Mikorbim, Rabbeinu Peretz, Mordechai, several of the great Rishonim who all say Pe'echad. The question became, what happens if there is no behema teme'ah in the Eidir? That's another very important word that we're going to need to know for tonight. Eidir. You know what's Eidir? Flock. The flock. If there's no non-kosher animal in the flock, let's say all of the animals in the flock are kosher. They're all cows and goats, and right? All of kosher animals obviously give milk too. Cows and goats and sheep. What happens if the goy has no non-kosher animals in the flock? Does the Isur still apply or not? Because the whole reason for the Isur, the Gemara says very clearly, is because of what? Because of maybe there's going to be some non-kosher milk mixed inside. You look at the herd, you look at the flock. On the farm, there's no non-kosher animals. Only kosher. What's the halacha over there? All of the poskim I mentioned, they all say Pe'echad. The Rashba says the same thing, by the way. That the halacha is, even so, even if there are no non-kosher animals in the herd, a Jew still has to see now what makes something, before we continue, what makes something, very important description, what makes something Chalav Yisrael?
Jew.
Does it have to be a Jewish cow? Does it have to be a cow owned by a Jew? No. What makes something Chalav Yisrael as opposed to Chalav Akum is that a Jew watches how either a Jew milks the cow, right? That's certainly fine. Or a Jew watches how the non-Jew milks the cow, and he makes sure that there's no non-kosher mixtures in here. No non-kosher milk. Say the Mordechai and the Samak and Rabbeinu Peretz and the Rashba and many, many other Gdolei Olam, that even if there are no non-kosher animals in the herd, the isur of Chalav Akum, if a Jew did not watch the milk being milked by the non-Jew, the Chalav is still asur, 100% asur. It's still considered Chalav Akum, which means very clearly what? Obviously non-kosher, but what do they hold? Remember I gave you two tzdadim? Do we say once, right, if the whole reason is what? Because of a non-kosher animal and non-kosher milk, that's the reason, right? Obviously the reason doesn't apply. So what does that tell you that these poskim hold? These poskim hold, it's called davar shebeminyan, which means davar shene'esar beminyan. An issue, an enactment of the Chachamim that was made that cannot be undone for any reason, even if the reason, the original reason for the enactment becomes obsolete, the Gzirah is intact, can't touch it. That's why all these poskim that the Bet Yosef brings down hold that even if there is no non-kosher animal in the herd, it's still Chalav Akum until the Jew watches it being milked. That's the opinion of these Rishonim. Let's look at Maran HaShulchan Aruch. What does Maran HaShulchan Aruch have to say about all of this? Says the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Kuf Tedvav, Yoreh De'ah, Saif Aleph. Says Maran, Chalav Shechalvo Oved Kochavim, which means milk milked by a non-Jew, Ve'en Yisrael Ro'ehu, Asur, Shem Me'irev Bo Chalav Tameh. Now, very simple. Milk that was milked by a non-Jew without Jewish supervision is asur, exactly what we said from the Gemara, because we are afraid that the non-Jew mixed into this milk non-kosher milk. Says Maran, Haya cholev beveto, ve'Yisrael yoshev mibachutz. If the non-Jew was milking in his own home or in his own barn or whatever it is, and the Jew is sitting outside. Im yadua she'en lo davar tameh be'idro mutar, afilu en Yisrael yachol lir'oto b'sha'a shu cholev. So he says, once again, here's the situation that Maran depicts. You have a non-Jew in his own house, a Jew is sitting outside, right outside the barn door. So he says, if the Jew knows that he has no non-kosher animals in his herd, it's enough. It's okay. It's mutar. Even though he can't see him right now, right? Because although he's sitting down right now and he can't see, were he to get up, able to see. Says Maran, היה לו דבר טמא בעדרו וישראל יושב מבחוץ ועובד כוכבים חולב לצורך ישראל, אפילו אינו יכול לראותו כשהוא יושב, אם יכול לראותו כשהוא עומד מותר. שיראה שמא יעמוד ויראהו, והוא שיודע שחלב טמא אסור לישראל. Same idea, whether or not, says Maran, whether or not the Jew knows that there's nothing tameh in the herd, or even if there is a non-kosher animal in the herd, but if you would be able to stand up and see him milking from where he is, says Maran, it's mutar. Now Maran very, very clearly says, okay, watch what he just said. Maran said, and all of the poskim understand him like this. Emunat Shemuel understands him like this. Agaon Kaf HaChaim understands the Shulchan Aruch, like the Bet Yosef understood the other Rishonim. Once again, what did Maran say? Remember the situation he spoke about? Even if he knows for a fact that the goy has no non-kosher animals in the herd, what did Maran says has to be the case in order for the milk to be mutar? He has to be sitting there, right? Once he's sitting there, even if he's not looking directly, but the goy has that element of fear because he's right there. But what does that show? That even if he did not have the Jew 100%, he can sign on it. 100% no non-kosher animals in the herd. Says Maran, what still has to be the case? The Jew has to be sitting there. The Jew still has to be supervising to an extent. Which means that what you see clearly from Maran HaShulchan Aruch, all of the poskim understand, and it's not only Maran. The Rama on the spot, in his Hagah, the Rama also in his Torat Chatat, he says the same thing. Many, many poskim understand like Maran Shulchan Aruch, that even when there is no non-kosher animal in the flock, in the herd, the halacha is the Jew still has to be sitting at the entrance of the barn. Meaning that we call that supervision. He doesn't have to necessarily be, eyes glued onto him. Or the Shulchan Aruch also says, he doesn't have to be watching the whole time. Yotzev v'nichnas is also mutar. Even if the Jew is going in and out of the barn during the milking, that's also mutar, as long as, say the poskim, one thing has to be the case, he has to be there at the beginning of the milking, and he has to inspect the kelim. He has to inspect the kelim to see that there is no leftover droplets of non-kosher milk, because once there's droplets in there, it can get mixed up and it's asur. So what has to be the case? The Jew has to be there. He can be going in and out, but he has to be there at least when? In the beginning, inspect the kelim, make sure it's clean, and then go in and out as you wish. That's enough. So, ta'am, even so. But again, first of all, you have to know. You have to know what's going on in there. You have to know sometimes there won't be shishim. The poskim talk about whether or not shishim applies here or not. Now, you have to understand one thing. You see from Maran clearly. What does Maran hold about the gezerah of Chalav Akum? Does he hold it's davar shene'esar b'minyan, or does he hold nitbatel tam nitbatel gezerah? Davar shene'esar b'minyan, clearly, because he says Maran, he makes no distinction. Whether you know there's a non-kosher animal there, even if you know for sure there is no non-kosher animal there, halacha is clear, the Jew still has to be sitting there, which means you still need the supervision, which means Maran holds very clearly, it's davar shene'esar b'minyan. It's something that is asur, and even if the reason doesn't apply, if there's no non-kosher animals in the herd, the reason doesn't apply. Even so, says Maran, it's still asur until the Jew sits there, or until he's going in and out. Yeah.
Two questions. Please refer to the automatic milking and also supervision with cameras.
Okay. Both questions regarding automatic milking and supervising with cameras. So the poskim talk about, we'll get to that at the end, but let's first talk about the ikar adin, right? First, let's talk about not automatic milking, let's talk about manual, because once we find out the halacha regarding manual milking, we'll understand the situation with regards to automatic as well.
Yeah. According to Maran, he does not differentiate between having some non-kosher animals or not having.
That's right. He says very clearly.
No difference?
He says the Yisrael still has to be sitting there. Still has to be sitting there.
One sounds to be more machmir than the other.
Because there is a slight difference, says Maran, that when it depends. If the Jew knows that there is no non-kosher animal in there, it's enough for him just to be seated there. Even if when he stands, he's not able to see. Because the goy, right, it's enough. That's considered enough. If he knows that there is a non-kosher animal in there, then the halacha is he has to be able to see when he stands. That's the distinction that Maran makes. But even so, Maran says clearly, even when there is no non-kosher animal, he still has to sit there. There still has to be an element of Jewish supervision on the milk. That's Da'at Maran. Now, yeah.
Does the cow have to be intact? In other words, if it has, let's say, it got made, 3 legs.
Yeah.
Can you still milk it? Is the milk kosher?
No, if it's a trefa, milk that comes out, just like a trefa is asur, milk that comes out of a trefa is asur. We're talking about regular cows. So it depends what kind of bodily harm is on the thing. If it's something that would not have been able to live for 12 months, that's called a trefa. And if it's a trefa, guess what? Not only is it asur and its meat is asur, its milk is also asur. So, we spoke about it a few weeks ago. How did the poskim allow drinking milk? Hare, you never know what's going on inside. Maybe the animal's a trefa. So we brought down from the Shach and many other poskim that the reason why we're allowed to drink milk is because what? Most animals, most cows are not terefot. Most animals, and you're Sovech on Rov, most animals are not terefot. If you have a terefa in front of you, so then you deal with it, obviously. But most animals, you don't have to assume that the animal's a terefa, because the majority of animals are not. Yeah.
Oh yeah, who holds that
even if you're 100% certain that there's no non-kosher animal in the flock,
Yeah.
then you don't need to put up supervision.
Oh, that's the next shita I want to get into. Now, not all of the poskim agree. I want to tell you that even among poskim Sfaradim, listen to this. The Radbaz, Rabbeinu David ben Zimra, was he's considered one of the earliest Acharonim. He was older. He lived in the generation of Maran Bet Yosef, Maran Shulchan Aruch. He was older than him. He was the Av Bedin in Mitzrayim. He was the Av Bedin of Egypt. Towards the end of his life, he moved to Tzfat. He moved to Tzfat and he was the Av Bedin. Maran Shulchan Aruch was a Dayan on his Bedin. So meaning he was considered the Gadol of Tzfat, the Radbaz. And he writes in his responsa, Chelik Bet Siman Ayin He, the Radbaz writes, and actually the Pri Chadash quotes in Halacha. Okay, Pri Chadash, also one of the major commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, who lived approximately 200 years ago, Rabbeinu Chizkiah de Sinwa. He was one of the biggest. The poskim say very clearly that unless Maran Shulchan Aruch disagrees, the halacha always follows Pri Chadash for Sfaradim. Now we'll see if he disagrees or not. But the Pri Chadash quotes the Radbaz, and they understand, and the Radbaz says very clearly. He says, although other things in the Mishnah may be davar shene'esar b'minyan, says the Radbaz, Chalav akum is not davar shene'esar b'minyan. Says the Radbaz, Chalav akum is something that the whole thing is because of the ta'am, because of the reason behind the gezerah. And he says, once the reason for the gezerah, the whole reason for the gezerah was what? Non-kosher animals, right? Non-kosher milk. Once that's non-existent anymore, then the whole gezerah, says the Radbaz, falls off. Therefore, says the Radbaz, says the Pri Chadash, say, right, and other poskim I'll tell you soon, they say, if either one of two things is true, if there is no non-kosher animal in the flock or in the city, in the vicinity, no non-kosher animals, right? Many times that's the case in dairy farms. When you have a dairy farm, right, what do you have there? You have cows or goats or whatever it is. You know for a fact there are no non-kosher animals. Or even if there are non-kosher animals in the herd, but the non-kosher milk is rarer, it's more rare than the kosher milk, and it's sold for more money, for more of a profit than the kosher milk, says the Radbaz, says Agaon Pri Chadash, the halacha is, even if a Jew didn't see the non-Jew milking it, the halacha is, the milk is mutar. Kach da'at Radbaz, kach da'at Pri Chadash. You know who else says this? Big chidush. But they say, poskim, Radbaz, Gdol Olam, Pri Chadash, another Gdol Olam. You know who else says the same thing? Another one of the major commentaries on Yoreh De'ah, on Shulchan Aruch. Agaon Pri Toar. You know what's Pri Toar? The Orach Chaim HaKadosh. Says the same halacha. Says the same exact thing. He quotes it in halacha. If either there are no non-kosher animals in the herd, or if the non-kosher milk is more expensive, right? What does it matter that it's more expensive? Such that he's not going to waste it on the Jew. He can make more profit on it, right? The Pri Toar says they would sometimes save the non-kosher milk and sell it to the dignitaries. It was considered like a delicacy. They could get much more profit for it. There's no reason for them to waste it on the Jew. The halacha over there is that what? They say that the gzera is over, and therefore the chalav is mutar, even if it is chalav akum, even if a Jew didn't see it being milked. Yeah. Either or.
So you're underestimating the bigger problem here, that maybe there was non-kosher milk still in the kelim, or it was still there. So
but again, what was the first case? If there's no non-kosher animals in the herd. If there's no non-kosher animals in the herd, guess what else won't be around?
Yeah,
no non-kosher animals, no non-kosher milk.
This person is saying even if there is non-kosher animals in the herd, that we don't care about.
You still don't have to worry because they're not mixing it together with this because every drop is precious.
but the fact is that there is still not kosher animals in the herd, so maybe one of the kelim that we used for there got
You don't have to be choshesh. You don't have to be. They separate it. They segregate because this is much more expensive. That's the opinion of, like I told you, Elbaz, Pri Chadash, Pri Toar. The Rama, I told you, the Rama said, so what does that tell you? What do they hold about the Gezerah? Nitbatel atam, nitbatel hagezerah. Once, you see, I'm showing you two schools of thought with regards to Chalav Akum. And depending on how you look at the Gezerah of Chalav Akum, either it's something that's there, it sticks, no matter what happens, it's there forever. Or once the reason behind it is gone, so the Gezerah is gone. So depending on how you look at it, that's going to make a difference between what? The big nafkamina, the big difference of opinion here is what? If there are no non-kosher animals in the herd. If there are no non-kosher animals in the herd, nothing, not in the vicinity, nothing around. According to Pri Chadash, Pri Toar, Elbaz. Not only that, Gdolei Rishonim, there are many Rishonim that hold like that also. Rashbash, b'shem his father, the Rashbetz. Maharash Doran, Sheilot Tshuvot Chut HaMshulash, I'm sorry. Many poskim hold like that as well. But on the other hand, what did I tell you before? Many great Rishonim on the other side, right? The Rashba, Mordechai, Samak, Rabbeinu Peretz, Maran HaShulchan Aruch, the Rama, Maharashdam. They hold that what? They say, no. They say, I don't care that there is no non-kosher animal in the herd. This is considered davar sheneisar b'minyan. The Chachamim made a gzerah, just like what? For example, he asked for more examples. For instance, Chazarat Hashatz. 850 years ago, when the Rambam lived, the Rambam writes in the Teshuvah that everybody in his times, forget about our times, the Rambam says in his times already, everybody was baki. Everybody was experts in praying. Everybody knew how to pray on their own. The original takana for Chazarat Hashatz was because of what? There were people who didn't know how to pray. Says the Rambam, in my generation, everybody knows how to pray. What happened to Chazarat Hashatz? Guess what? Still there. Okay? Now, another example. No, it doesn't matter. The idea is takanot chachamim, takana, gzerot chachamim. It has nothing to do with aseh.
One more gezerah that it was nullified.
For instance, the Gemara says, taking medication in many situations on Shabbat is asur. Right? Takanot chachamim, you're not allowed to take medication on Shabbat. Why? There are situations where it's mutar. But usually, in general, there's an isur of taking medication on Shabbat. Why? Gezerah mishum shechikat samamanim. Because in those times, how did medication used to be made? They had to take herbs. They had to take all sorts of herbs and spices and ingredients. In order to make medication, what did they have to do? Grind it. That is av melacha. That's a Shabbat, a Torah prohibition on Shabbat of melechet tochen, grinding on Shabbat. Because of that, the Chachamim said, even if it's ground already, guess what? You cannot take medication on Shabbat. 1 second. Who grinds medication anymore? Anybody grinds medication here? Even pharmacists. Do pharmacists grind medication?
Sometimes they
Mix. Nobody's grinding anything. Everything's already ready-made by the time. Nobody's grinding anything. Everything comes ready, packaged. And even so, the Gzerah is still intact. The Gzerah of not taking medication on Shabbat is still intact. Bimkomo omed. Another example.
So we cannot take pills on Shabbat?
In general, no. Certain examples, yes. In general. That's a very famous halacha. It's halacha in Shulchan Aruch. You're already getting into nitty-gritty. That's, I said.
For example, tongues.
1 second. I don't want to get into examples because that's not the shiur. But the point is that I said, taking medication on Shabbat is asur. Takanat chachamim, period. Now, there are specific situations, there are stipulations in halacha where it's mutar. I refer you to the poskim, Shulchan Aruch, your local Orthodox rabbi for knowing exactly when it's mutar and when it's asur. But in general, that's gzerah. Another example. No, not always. Not always. Another example. Me'en Sheva on Friday night, right? After the Amidah on Friday night. What's the halacha? After Arvit, we have Me'en Sheva. the Shliach Tzibur makes a sort of what? Sort of Chazarat Hashatz. A short one. What's that for? Why? Did you ever find any other Arvit that has Chazarat Hashatz in it? So what happened? On Friday night, we're bored, right? Everybody has loads of energy. They don't know what to do with. So everybody's doing Chazarat Hashatz on Friday night. Why? So the Gemara says very clearly. The Gemara says, because in those times, in those times, they used to have the Bate Knesset would be where? The Bate Knesset would be in the fields. The Gemara says in the fields were uninhabited. And where you have places that are uninhabited, there are mazikim, harmful forces. So the Chachamim were afraid that what? A person would come late to the tefillah. Everybody would be done praying. Everybody would go home together, but he was late, so he's not done yet. He's still praying. He stays there alone. And then he has to walk home alone through the field in an uninhabited place, so he's going to be susceptible to the mazikim. It's because of sakana. So the Chachamim said, you know what? Let's make a takana to make the davening just a little bit longer on Friday night. So even if a person came late, what happens? He has a chance to catch up and lead with everybody else. Okay, guess what? The Bate Knesset are not in the fields anymore. And it's not in uninhabited places. And there's no mazikim. The Chachamim abolished the mazikim. We don't see them. And yet, guess what? Every single Friday night, what are we doing? Na'in Sheva. We're still doing it. So,
cooking on Shabbat is asur, but Chachamim, they said if you cooked on Friday, you can eat on Shabbat. Why didn't they make the same gezerah? If the pills were ground on Friday, you can use them on
we're the Chachamim. We're not here to... You know, the Chachamim
I'm questioning why they couldn't apply the same rule.
So where they did it. Otherwise, you know, the Chachamim could have said, you know what? No eating on Shabbat. Everybody has to fast. And not only on Shabbat, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday also until you're done.
No, it's good that they said you can eat. They should have said you can use also the pill, but that was ground on Friday.
No. Well, that's exactly the takana. So let's stay focused. Let's stay on the... So this is the Svarat HaMachloket. Now, guess what? Remember, I told you there were some poskim, the Pri Chadash. I told you it was on the tzad of the Matirim. That where the reason doesn't apply, if there's no non-kosher animals in the herd, mutar, right? That was the Pri Chadash, okay? And he said, Pri Chadash says, he was a Rav for a tkufa in Amsterdam. And he said, that's the minhag in Amsterdam. And he says, guess what? Not only that, that's what I do, says Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash says, a goy brings me a cup of milk, and I know he has no non-kosher animals. I didn't see anything. Shakon yamidvaro, drink it. Pri Chadash. Okay. Huh? Rabbeinu Chizkiah de Sinwa. That answers that. So, listen to this. The Sdechemed, though, on the spot, the Sdechemed was also one of the tremendous Geonei Sfarad, one of the biggest poskim. If you have Sdechemed is really, it's a mind-boggling work. It's mind-boggling. It's like an encyclopedia of almost every ayirich, every topic you can think about in Halacha, in Shas, in poskim. And this was before no computers and no search engines, just pure, all-encompassing knowledge of Kol HaTorah Kula. It's a unbelievable chibur, Sdechemed. Rabbeinu Chaim Chizkiyahu Medini. That was his name. Says Agon Sdechemed. He was born in Hebron, and he lived there. He was Abedin over there also. Now, Eretz Yisrael, Hebron. So, he writes in his Sefer Sdechemed about Chalav Akum, and he says over there as follows. And he says, he brings this Pri Chadash, and he says, Pri Chadash, when he said that, V'nitvakchu imo kol gdolei doro. All of the Chachamim of the generation disagreed with, and they argued with the Pri Chadash, and he said, what the Pri Chadash says, the minhag in Amsterdam was to be matir, he says, not true. He says the testimony is not true. He says, I saw. He says, and the other poskim said, the minhag in Amsterdam was to be oser. And he says, kim'at, almost all of the poskei Sfarad, they all held not like the Pri Chadash and the Pri Toar, rather in accordance with the opinion of Maran HaShulchan Aruch, who clearly says that even when you don't have a reason to believe there are no non-kosher animals in the herd, even so, they say it's still asur no matter what. You need to have Chalav Yisrael, you need to have Jewish supervision and whatnot. Now, that's the Sdechemim. Not only, so we're talking about now Poskei Sfarad.
In Israel,
Huh?
it's no.
Why?
Because, it's, you don't want to embarrass the goy. If he's bringing you something, you don't want to do,
Let me ask you a question. A goy comes over to you, he's your best friend. I don't know why a person would have a friend. A goy comes over to you and he takes a bottle of wine, not mevushav. And he says, come my friend, I just made a mazal tov. Okay? Why is that obvious? Here, he pours it for you. Bechavod, bifnei kol am ve'eda. All eyes on you. What do you say?
Kiddush.
A Jew, a goy comes to you and he cooks food for you. 1 second. A goy comes and cooks food for you. I'm trying to depict, right, through a little bit of humor. Feelings of the goy have absolutely zero bearing on the halacha. The Chachamim said it's asur, bishul akum, pat akum, chalav akum. All of the things that the Chachamim said were asur, zero bearing whatsoever the feelings of the goy. Let him get embarrassed.
Animal of the goy, right? So it's the.
No. So no, it has.
Meaning you can't trust.
That's exactly what we're not trusting the goy, and because we don't trust the goy.
So why would they hold that it's without the Seisha Akol? That's what I'm trying to.
No, because their opinion is, since there are no, they said, once again, the point of Chalav Akum, the Gzera, is only based on the Ta'am, the reason. That's what they hold. Once the Ta'am, once the reason for the Gzera, which is the non-kosher milk, is not here, there is no non-kosher animal around. So therefore, the whole Gzera falls away. That's the point. Now,
the other
let's
you mentioned his name, Mordechai. Mordechai is Mordechai or Mordechai?
No, the name of the Mordechai, the name of his chibur, the name of his work was Mordechai. His name was Rabbeinu Mordechai Bar Hillel Ashkenazi. That was his name. He was murdered. He was murdered on Kiddush Hashem. So he was one of the Baalei HaTosafot, later Baalei HaTosafot. Anyway, but his chibur, his pirush is called Mordechai. That's just the way it is. I didn't write it. So, Rabotai. As follows. Back to our situation, not only Poskei Sfarad beat up a little bit on this Pri Chadash and Pri Toar and Elbaz, the Sdechim, goes full force against it. And especially because it's against Maran HaShulchan Aruch. Not only that, Poskei Ashkenaz, Hagaon Tshuva Me'ahava, the Talmid Muvhak of Nonodab Yehuda, Hagaon Rabbi Elazar Fleckless, Hagaon Chatam Sofer, many Poskei Ashkenaz vehemently disagree, and they say there is no room whatsoever in Halacha to base this svara of the Pri Chadash and the Pri Toar and the Elbaz, and it's a davar shene'esar b'minyan, whether or not there is a non-kosher animal present. The halacha is that without Jewish supervision, it is considered chalav akum, and it is 100% asur. Chatam Sofer, Hagaon Chatam Sofer says that beferush. He screams about it in his Sheilot Utshuvot. He disagrees. So it's not only a Sfaradi Ashkenazi thing. You have plenty, and not only that, the Rama, like I told you, the Rama was on the side of Maran HaShulchan Aruch that it's asur. So this is not a Sfaradi Ashkenazi thing. This is poskim how to understand the Gzera of Chalav Akum. Now, moving right along.
Why is it so strict?
Because
Old Yisrael and why are those like very things that stand out compared to
each one has its own reason for why the Chachamim saw fit to decree, to enact about these specific things. But like we said before, davar shene'esar b'minyan, the Chachamim were afraid of chalav tameh, finished. It applies, that asur, that's the Chachamim, that's the power of the Chachamim to enact things like that. Now, watch this. What happens though there is a famous, now this is where, that's the first part of the shiur. The next part of the shiur evolves into what everybody calls chukei hamemshala. Oh, everybody knows. Oh, okay, here we go. Now, everybody knows the famous Gaon of Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, in Igrot Moshe, Yored De'ah, Chelek Aleph, Siman Mem Zayin Mem Chet. The Igrot Moshe speaks about this specific topic. And he says, let me tell you something. He says in a situation, in a country such as the United States, there are strict laws about things of this nature. And he says, if you know about mixing, not when you market milk in general, right? Just stam regular milk that has to be cow's milk, and there are strict government regulations about these ideas, and you can't mix anything else in there. So Gaon Rav Moshe Feinstein says this is called something that's called yedi'ah berura. Said yedi'ah berura. This is something that's called 100% certain knowledge that they are not mixing any non-kosher milk into the cow's milk, because he says that's the government regulations. And he says Gaon Feinstein, and he brings proofs to this from several different places around the Shas, that yedi'ah berura equals re'iyah. Certain knowledge equals what? Seeing. It's as if you saw it yourself. So therefore what? So he says, the whole takana of Chalav Yisrael was what? For the Jew to see the milking. Says a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein, when you have strict government regulations in place that give you a certain knowledge, right? Knowledge that is 100% for sure that they're not doing it, that makes it as if that's as good as what? As actually seen, as a Jew actually seeing the cow being milked. That is the opinion of a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein in one tshuva. Now, he brings several proofs to this matter, and then I want to read to you. You can leave it. One second, Mechila. Now, wait with everything, because Be'ezrat Hashem, I never leave you hanging. We always cover all the bases. So if I would talk half-baked, so then, Baruch Hashem, we talk very, very clear. We hit all the spots. Says a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein, somebody asked him in the next tshuva, the person who asked him about this thing, and he said, back 1 second. He said, what happens now, although there are government regulations, he says, a person could still kind of, try to get around the government regulations by playing games. And when he does that, he says, this was back in Tafshin Yudalet. Tafshin Yudalet was 1954, I'm sorry, 1954. So watch this. I get money obviously was much different then, but he says, ואף שכבוד תורתו שלח לי תשובה מפקיד השלטון שהעונש על זה הוא רק $125 עד $100. וגם הם מקבלי שוחדה. He says at the time, okay, messing with the government regulation, if you were caught mixing in non-kosher milk into the milk, how much would they charge the company fine? $25 to $100. That was the fine. And he says, and the person asking him the question, he says, first of all, the fine is only 25, huh? But again, we're talking about a massive, now let's go $100. Let's say $100, right? Let's go by stretch of imagination. How much was $100 in 1954? How much is that worth today? Let's say $10,000. Let's say, right? Let's $10,000. We're talking about a massive industry.
I think it's
How-
today.
Let's say, how much is, let's say, right, we're going to the extreme, it's $10,000. How much is $10,000 for a massive company?
Nothing.
Peanuts, right?
off.
So he says, and the person asking the Rav Moshe said, and by the way, the government officials, they get shochad. They take shochad. That's what he says. So he says, so what good do the government regulations do? So answers a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein. He says what? He says, it doesn't pay. Why? Because number one, there are no non-kosher animals on dairy farms. In order to start going to milk non-kosher animals, right? Horses and donkeys and camels. First, you have to go find horses and donkeys and camels. Then you have to go hire people to go milk those things. That's going to cost you money. A. And then what? When you do that, what do you have to do? Then, this is Rav Moshe Feinstein talking. He says, what do you have to do next? Then you have to bribe not only the government officials, you have to bribe the entire company, everybody who works for you, so that they don't rat on you. So he says there's just too much investment going on for no reason whatsoever. And for that reason, all of these things he brushes away, and he says the government regulations are good enough to create as if there's a re'iyah, as if there is a Jew viewing it. But he ends off, he says very interesting. He says, ולכן הרוצה לסמוך ולהקל יש לו טעם גדול ורשאי. He says a person who wants to act leniently has a good reason to, and he's permitted to. אבל מכל מקום לבעלי נפש מן הראוי להחמיר ואין בזה משום יוהרה. He says, even so, a Baal Nefesh, a person who's Yireh Shamayim, should be Mahmir, and this does not constitute Gava. V'kach ani noheg le'achmir le'atzmi. And he says, Agaon of Moshe Feinstein himself, he says, what did he say about himself? I don't rely on what I wrote on this tshuva. It's mutar. He says, he writes it's mutar, but a Baal Nefesh should be Mahmir. Now, Hagaon Chazon Ish says something similar with regards to milk that was milked under government regulations. Hagaon Chazon Ish in Yoreh De'ah Siman Mem Aleph, he writes about this also, and he says, Yesh Lomar, he says there is room to say like Hagaon Feinstein. However, and by the way, Moshe Feinstein says this is without even getting onto the Pri Chadash. The Pri Chadash's thing was what? Right, what was this thing? When there's no non-kosher animals in the herd. Says Rav Moshe, my heter is even stronger than that. You don't even have to get on to the Pri Chadash. Why? Because my thing is talking about government regulation. The government regulation makes such a strong assumption that nothing went on here that it makes it like Re'iyah Mamash. It makes it like a Jew is watching. So he says, forget about the Pri Chadash for a moment. My svara is even stronger. That's the svara of Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein. Hagaon Chazon Ish says something similar.
So he holds the stop. He disagrees with the Ramah, right?
He's, according to him, the Ramah would agree. The Ramah didn't speak about government supervision, government regulations. So he says it's possible that they would agree. However, now this is obviously there are several great poskim that ruled along the lines of Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein. Hagaon of Yaakov Kamenetsky held that way too. Hagaon of Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rosh Yeshiva in YU, held the same way. They held that there was room for it. Several other poskim, Ashkenazim Be'ikar, they held like that, and that is the basis for what we call today the basis for Chalav Stam, which doesn't really exist in the poskim, or what we call today OUD. OUD is just, that's a specific hashgacha, but several other hashgachot have that too, which means it is milk that was milked by a non-Jew without Jewish supervision. But what are we relying on to say that it's kasher, according to Hagaon Feinstein? The government regulations that make it as if a Jew saw it. That's the basis. This famous Teshuvah of Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein is the basis for the heter of Chalav Stam. Now, forget about Sfaradim for a moment, okay? We'll come back to that in a second. But even among the Poskei Ashkenaz, even among Poskim Ashkenazim, okay? The Poskim Ashkenazim, many Poskei Ashkenaz go vehemently and they disagree with the Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein. Barosh u'barishona, the Chelkat Yaakov, Hagaon of Yaakov Mordechai Breish, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he was the Av Bedin in Zurich, in Switzerland, Zurich. And he writes, he takes every piece of the Igrot Moshe, every proof that the Igrot Moshe brings. He was in the same generation. and he takes every piece, and everything the Igrot Moshe brings a proof, he disproves it. Disproves. And he says a very strong lashon. I'm going to read it to you. He says, והנה באמת אין בכל ראיותיו כדי לסתור דין המפורש בשולחן ערוך והפוסקים עד גדולי האחרונים והנהוג מקדמת דינה בכל תפוצות ישראל. He says there is nothing in the Teshuvah of Igrot Moshe that is able to uproot the din of the Gemara and the din of the Shulchan Aruch and all of the poskim until this very day. He says he doesn't have the authority to do that because everything he's saying, according to the understanding of the Chilkat Yaakov, is against the simple understanding of the Shas and Poskim. That's the Chilkat Yaakov. Minchat Yitzchak, Hagaon Av Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, who was the Av Bedin of the Aidah Charedit in Yerushalayim. He also passed away about 15, 20 years ago. He also vehemently disagreed with this. Hagaon of Shmuel Halevi Wazner, Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, in Shevet HaLevi. He says, we said the Chazon Ish was on the side of Moshe Feinstein on this issue. He said, I went to the Chazon Ish. Okay, he was one of the Poskei Hador. He lived in Bnei Brak along with the Chazon Ish. Obviously, he was much younger, but he says, I went over to him. And he says, I went to the Chazon Ish, and I fought with him in his face to disprove all of his ra'ayot and to say that no, this government regulation, lo ma'alev lo morid, it doesn't make any difference. So many other Poskei Ashkenaz, besides for these, disagreed. And what about for Sfaradim? For Sfaradim, it's also very important to realize. Remember, especially according to the Poskei Sfarad, that nitbatla ha'tam, lo nitbatla ha'gezra, it's davar shene'esar b'minyan. Whether or not the reason applies, remember we said before, that's why almost all of the Poskei Sfarad disagree with the Pri Chadash and Pri Toar. What do they say? I don't care that there is no non-kosher animal. No non-kosher animal. There's no reason for the Gzerah. Even so, Da'at Maran, and Da'at Arama, and Da'at Ma'arashdam, and Da'at almost Sdechemed, all of the Poskim Sfaradim say very, very clearly that the Gzerah is still in place. That being said, if the Gzerah is still in place, what does that teach us about here? Same thing. What does it matter? Government regulation, not government regulation. The Takanat Chachamim was what? That a Jew has to see. I don't care why he didn't see. If the reason why he didn't see is because there's no non-kosher animal in the herd. If the reason why he didn't see is because of government regulation. It doesn't matter, according to Rov Kechol Poskei Sfarad, that what? Once you didn't see, the takana is still there, it can never be abolished. So especially according to Poskei Sfarad, very, very much, they would not rely on this psak of Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein and the Chazon Ish. Now, there is one area of Chalav that is a little bit more lenient for several reasons, and that is Avkat Chalav. Avkat Chalav, which is milk powder. Milk powder, many poskim. Now, although Maran Zichrono Libracha in She'elot U'Tshuvot Yabia Omer Chelek He Yoreh De'ah Siman Yud Aleph speaks about this also at length. Many poskim hold that dairy items made not with milk, with actual milk, but with milk powder, there is certainly more room for leniency. Hagaon Zakan Aharon, Hagaon of Aaron Wolkin, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, from about almost 100 years ago. Hagaon Tzitz Eliezer, Hagaon Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in his Har Tzvi, they all say that it's mutar. Why? First and foremost, can we consider milk powder davar shene'esar b'minyan? Absolutely not. He says why. All of them say why. Because davar shene'esar b'minyan is only when you're dealing with the item itself. What did the Chachamim make the Gezerah on? Milk. Liquid milk in its pure form. Once it's dehydrated, once it's now in powder form, the Chachamim didn't talk about this. This is called Panim Chadashot Ba'u Lekan. The Chachamim never spoke about this kind of item.
But cheese.
Huh? Cheese is different gzera. Huh?
You're saying the milk itself is not, how can I say the powder is okay? You take milk that is questionable, you make it powder, and it's
So first of all, many,
You
no,
can bake
but
it
again,
down,
no.
you can change it and now
We're not talking about where you, obviously, if you derived milk powder, if you derived milk from a horse and you made horse milk powder, so obviously that's asur. But we're talking about a situation where we know for sure, we checked it out, there's this is what I was getting at. All these poskim say that there's room for leniency. Why? It is no longer davar shene'esar b'minyan. The only thing that's davar shene'esar b'minyan is the milk. Milk powder, the Chachamim never spoke about. There's something called in Yiddish being oiber chacham. You know what's oiber chacham? Being over smart. Don't be smarter than the Chachamim. En anu gozrim gezerot mida'atenu. The Chachamim made a gzera, leave it. Don't touch it. Right? The Chachamim made a gzera. We can't make gzerot, more gzerot. No, the Chachamim said Chalav akum is asur, so I'm going to make a gzera. You can't even, you can't look at their cows. You see? I'm such a tzaddik. Can't look at the cow. Asur. Right? Shmirat ha'inayin. Wait one second. What the Chachamim, so once we say that what the Chachamim said was asur, was the milk, the powder is not asur. So once we say it's not davar shene'esar b'minyan, so what does it come down to? Not davar shene'esar b'minyan, rather, we're back to what? Being dependent on ta'am, on the reason. So now everybody would agree, even the poskim that were machmir, say these poskim, there's Kanaron, the Tzitz Eliezer, and the Hartzevi, and all of the poskim that are matir, and the Chazon Ish also says, he speaks specifically about milk powder. So they say that there is room for leniency because, once again, there is no takanat chachamim specifically on this. So what are we down to? The ta'am. What was the ta'am? Non-kosher milk. So once you're able to ascertain that there's no non-kosher milk in there, that the powder is derived from kosher substances, right? Which how do you ascertain that? Either there's no non-kosher animal in the herd, or government regulation. All of these things tell you what? Ta'am, that the ta'am doesn't apply. But everybody would agree here, according to these poskim, that you could use ta'am to weigh the pros and the cons of this avka, because it's not davar shene'esar b'minyan. And therefore, because of that, since it's not davar shene'esar b'minyan, it's panim chadashot ba'u lekan. And there is certainly room for it to come only from kosher sources, because it is there's no dvarim tme'im, or if there are government regulations, so there's more room for it to. Now, so what does Maran Zichrono Livracha write about this? He says, so now, what is the halacha lema'aseh about all of this? Now, I want to be very clear. I had my Birkei Yosef here somewhere. 1 second. Oh, here it is. Okay. Listen to this. Rabotai, very, very interesting. I say this with a lot of tzar, and I think just listen carefully. I'm happy we're on live stream, and it's Baruch Hashem on the airwaves, because sometimes we have to just be ma'amid tadat al tilo. We have to say the truth and make sure everybody knows the truth. Recently, it's been brought to my attention that a certain individual, obviously I'm not going to say his name, certain individual, he has maybe a little bit of a following, and I don't know if it's an email or a blog or what. That's the way people do things today, right? Halacha, instead of learning halacha from Sfarim and from Rabbanim or real Talmidei Chachamim, so people like to learn halacha from blogs, right? Obviously, that's not the way to do it. So this individual became, so to speak, the self-proclaimed spokesman of Maran Chacham Ovadia Yosef Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Livracha, and he came out with piskei halacha that according to Maran Zichrono Livracha for Sfaradim, Chalav Stam, which is OUD, is mutar for Sfaradim according to Chacham Ovadia lechatchila, and that's what he was publicizing, and that's what he was sending around. And I got somebody, a few people actually asked me, because it sounds, so first of all, Baruch Hashem, you see, when you have, after hearing everything that you heard, your first reaction to hearing something like that is, whoa, something is wrong with that. Because according to everything, according to Maran Shulchan Aruch, all the poskim Sfaradim, okay? And I want to read to you the Maran Zichron, in order to say that, first of all, it's preposterous, it's a lie, and it is twisting and distorting the opinion of Maran Zichrono Livracha. You want to say halacha and get it wrong, that's your own prerogative. That's bad enough in and of itself, to say the halacha wrong. But to say a wrong halacha and to attribute it to Gdolei Olam, that's a major, major, major no-no. Now, I want to read to you the Shiurei Bracha, Maran Achida, which Maran Zichrono Livracha, I don't know why he would say that, because Maran says very clearly, I'll tell you even the source, you can quote me on it. She'elot u'tshuvot Yechaveh Da'at, Chelek Dalet, Siman Mem Bet. Maran Zichrono Livracha says very, very clearly, as does the Yalkut Yosef in Ilchot Chalav Akum, as does Chacham Agaon Moreno Rav Yitzchak Yosef the Rishon LeZion, in one of the letters that he put out very clearly, that the opinion of his father is like the opinion of Maran Achida that I'm about to read to you very clearly. ולעניין הלכה, במקום שאין מנהג בעיר פשוט לכל להקל, where there is no widespread minhag that it's certainly mutar, יש להחמיר ודאי. You have to certainly be mahmir in accordance with the ruling of Maran HaShulchan Aruch. Not like the Pri Chadash, not like the Pri Toar, not like a Gaon Feinstein. You have to be mahmir to have Chalav Yisrael, mamash b'iyata Yisrael. At least going in and out, sitting outside. וכך פשטה הוראה בכל גלילות טורקיה וארץ הצבי. This is the widespread halacha, the hora'ah, the psak, in all of Turkey, says Maran Achida, and Eretz Atzvi. Eretz Atzvi is what? Eretz Yisrael. He says that is the halacha. And Maran Zichrono Livracha, very clearly in Yechaveh Da'at, very clearly, Agaon Chacham Yitzchak and Yalkut Yosef says very clearly that the halacha for Sfaradim is in accordance with Da'at Maran. Huh? Not, everywhere, this is the halacha. And he writes very clearly, listen to me, listen very carefully. Now, I want to end off with this. And he writes, says Agaon Yalkut Yosef, and he says when his father and they would travel outside to America, to Brazil, and they would serve them Chalav Stam, not Chalav Yisrael things, he would tell them to abstain from it. And he would say, there's only one way to be matir, there's only one way to be mekel for Sfaradim to have Chalav Stam. And he says that's only when they live there, be'ofen kavua, they live in a place, they settle in a place, and it is impossible to obtain Chalav Yisrael in that place in general. Over there, you can possibly act leniently according to the Pri Chadash and the Pri Toar and the addition of a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein and the Chazon Ish when there is no other option available. You know something? Even a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein who said that there is room for Kula, you remember, because of government regulations, okay? He said, hey, okay, this is, a lot of people don't know this. Oh, they said, Rav Moshe Feinstein says it's mutar. Oh, hold your horses. Rav Moshe Feinstein said it's mutar, and he himself didn't do it. He himself had Chalav Yisrael. That's A. B. I want to tell you something else. One second. Because he ba'al nefesh. Then, in another tshuva, in the same Igrot Moshe, Chelek Bet, Siman Lamed He, of Yoreh De'ah, says the Igrot Moshe, to a school. אם אינו קשה מאוד להשיג חלב שישראל רואהו, ראוי למנהלי ישיבות להקפיד דווקא ליתן לתלמידים מחלב זה, אף שהוא ביוקר מעט, כי הוא מענייני חינוך שידעו שראוי לבני תורה להחמיר, אף כשיש רק חשש איסור. A school asked him, should we get Chalav Stam or Chalav Yisrael? He says, if it's not impossible to get Chalav Yisrael, even if it's a little bit more, he says, get Chalav Yisrael. That's what he told the school to get for the Talmidim. That's what he told the principal to get. In another, what? Yeah, no, it's not going to break the bank. Don't worry. I never saw anybody go poor and have to start begging because he was makpid on Chalav Yisrael. Never in my life. On the contrary, when a person's makpid on halacha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him the ability to do so. If a person says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm doing this, I'm sacrificing, I'm paying a little bit more in order to serve you according to all of the poskim, guaranteed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't hang him out to dry, obviously. Now, Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein adds in a written letter from the year Tafshin Kaf Daled, 1964, which is brought in Kovetz Ginat Vradim, and he says as follows. Watch this. The same Hagaon of Moshe Feinstein. Don't make a mistake. שבכל מקום שנמצא חלב ישראל בהשגחה, צריך להחמיר. ומה שכתבנו טעמים להקל, הוא דווקא במקום שלקה חלב ישראל. וניו יורק הוא מקום שלקה בזה שום דוחק. Did you hear his words? What did he just say? I'll translate. He says, all of the heterim that I wrote in my teshuvot about Chalav Stam, about OUD, that applies in a place where you're not able to obtain Chalav Yisrael. If you are, it doesn't apply. And guess what? And he hit the final nail in the coffin. He said, and what about New York? He said, the New York hu makom sheleka baze shum dochak. What do those words mean? New York is a place that there is zero urgency. There is no pressing need for this matter. Now, guess what? I'll bring you another ayah. A Gaon of Moshe Feinstein had a Talmid Muvhak. One of his biggest Talmidim was a Gaon of Rav Ephraim Greenblatt, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was the Av Bedin in Memphis, Tennessee. At the end of his life, he moved to Harnof. I was his neighbor for a few years. He lived on the same street that I used to live on, Rehov Agassi. He has a very, very famous She'elot Utshuvot called She'elot Utshuvot Rivevot Ephraim. Talmid Muvhak of a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein. He writes in his She'elot Utshuvot Rivevot Ephraim, that's why I'm sourcing everything, so that you can't, no more games. He writes Beferush, Rivevot Ephraim, Chelek Chet, Siman Yud Aleph. He says, נראה דמי שגר במקום שאפשר להשיג חלב שראהו ישראל, ודאי צריך להשתמש בזה. וההיתר של מורי ורבי זכר צדיק לברכה הוא במקומות שאפשר להשיגו. Clear as day. What did he say? He says, if you live in a place that you can, so you see, even the Heterim of Hagaon Moshe Feinstein, and this is actually the psak that Maran Zichrono Livracha wrote, as is quoted in Yalkut Yosef, that they're all saying the same thing. If you can't get your hands on anything else, then you know what? Kedayim, the Pri Chadash, and the Pri Toar, and the Elbaz, and the Gaon of Moshe Feinstein, and the Chazon Ish, lismoch aleim b'shat hadachak. If it's a shat hadachak, if it's a pressing situation, you can't get your hands on anything else. Well, you're not going to eat dairy, you're not going to, okay, b'di'avad, that's the situation that you're in. But if you're in a situation where you're able to obtain it, you see time and time again, a Gaon of Moshe Feinstein himself didn't eat it. A Gaon of Moshe Feinstein writes, he says, you're not a choteh, but he says, my heter was meant in a place where you can't get it. New York is a place where you can get it. His Talmid Muvhak in She'elot Utshuvot Rivevot Ephraim says, the heter of my Rebbe is only in a place where you can't get it. Again, how many more times do you want to hear it? Again and again and again. They're saying the same exact thing. Sourced. You can look it up. So, to say, now, is there a little bit room for more heter by avkat chalav, by milk powder? Now, by the way, milk powder, even nowadays, there are Chalav Yisrael substitutes for milk powder as well. There are plenty that can be found. Milk powder are in many, many dairy products. Not all of them use actual milk. Some of them will use milk powder. The reason being, milk powder is cheaper because it's easier to transport. It's lighter. Now,
that's
many,
Harambam talks about Chalav Yisrael.
Not about this specific, obviously brings down Chalav Akum, but he doesn't get into all of the details that we spoke about from the other poskim. Now, but Maran HaShulchan Aruch does. Now, therefore, for a person, one second, let me just finish the thought. Therefore, I just want to correct and make sure that it's known, B'sha'ar bat Rabim, that what this person said, or what this person publicized in forums and emails, whatever it is, in the name of Maran Rabbeinu Ovadia Yosef Zecher Tzadik Kadosh Livracha, the Chalav Stam is mutar lechatchila for Sfaradim, is sheker gamur. To say that in the name of Maran Zichrono Livracha is a lie. It's warping his opinion. It's not true. And by the way, just for kicks, obviously, it seems that he didn't read all the sources. Maran Zichrono Livracha says beferush Yechavedat, I told you, Chelek Dalet, Siman Mem Bet, that the halacha follows Maran Achidah, that we're obligated. Forget about Ashkenazim for a moment. Sfaradim, Maran HaShulchan Aruch, Kol Gdolei Sfarad says that's the Chemed. Davar shene'esar b'minyan, davar shene'esar b'minyan, you cannot get out of it. And especially if you're in a place where Chalav Yisrael is able to be found, so there's certainly no room for Heter, especially for Sfaradim, to rely on Chalav Stam. It has to be Chalav Yisrael Mamash, Chalav that a Jew saw. Many hashgachot, they asked before, employed, they use methods of automatic milking, and they see through video cameras. Many poskim say that constitutes Chalav Yisrael because you can actually see. You see what's going on live. It's not like you're watching a recording. You can watch it live. So many poskim consider that Chalav Yisrael. Now, that being said, this individual also said that it's mutar lechatchila for Sfaradim outside of Israel not to be makpid on Yashan. B'shem Chacham Ovadia Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha. That's another lie. That's another warping of the truth. So I'm just trying to explain to you. I want to just end off with questions and one small word just to explain this further. Yeah.
About the cheese.
Cheese is a different halacha altogether. That's going to have to be for a different time. Suffice it that we spoke about. This is only milk. We didn't even get to the
But
cheese.
you go to a pizzeria, like the kosher pizzeria, it's Chalav Yisrael or no?
It depends. You have to see what it says on the Teudah. And I wouldn't say of course. Of course is not necessarily. Whatever it says on the Teudah. If it says Chalav Yisrael, usually it is, yeah. But you have to see what it says in the Teudah. Yeah.
Baby formula is the same category as dry milk.
Oh, so baby formula is the same idea. If you can get baby formula is milk powder. If it's dairy, there's milk powder in there. So if you can get, if the baby tolerates a Chalav Yisrael substitute, there are many Chalav Yisrael substitutes, Baruch Hashem, especially in Eretz Yisrael. Many of them are imported to America also. If you can, matov manayim. If not, like we said, there's much more of a leniency, even for Sfaradim, with regards to milk powder than to actual milk. So that would, if the baby can't tolerate it or if there is no substitute, it's certainly mutar to give a baby non-Chalav Yisrael formula. Yeah.
It's just like we said with Kamach Hashan.
Yeah.
The OU puts their stamp of it on it, but it doesn't, like, how are we even allowed to?
Absolutely. The fact that a kashrut agency that writes, right, either OUD, OKD, Star KD, whatever it is, whatever the kashrut is, the fact that they put that stamp on it, remember, they are there they cater to a large body of people that want to keep kasher, and not always do they have all of the resources that we have. So they cater to a much larger audience. Are they our poskim to say that this is mutar for us? No. Our poskim are whom? Our poskim are the Shas and poskim Rishonim and Acharonim and Maran HaShulchan Aruch, that we clearly prove that what? That for Sfaradim, there's certainly much more room to be stringent and to only consume Chalav Yisrael than for Ashkenazim who may have these other heterim. So that's with regards to that. Yeah.
Maybe you should send a recording of tonight to that person that he should know about the senses.
I don't, whatever. Okay, no comment. Anyway, yeah.
What if you live in a place that, like,
Yeah.
the only place that you can get Chalav Yisrael is like an hour and a half away. It's completely out of your way, and you won't. Let's say you go to
So
work,
again, that's if you live in a place. So if you go to that place, usually that's an hour and a half away. Sometimes, and you stock up. Well, matov manayim. But if you don't, that means you're in a place. You live in a place where you don't have Chalav Yisrael readily available. And like we said before, even for Sfaradim, there are. We're not going to say no poskim says no. You have to be blind to say no poskim say it's mutar. Sfaradim have to be machmir unless you're in a situation beyond your control. You can't get any Chalav Yisrael otherwise. Then there is room to be mekel in your pressing. That's considered a pressing situation. You can be mekel on that pressing situation. I want to end off with one vort before Tfilat Arvit. I think it's very important. I heard this last week. B'shem the Panovich Rav Gaon of Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman Zechet Tzadik Livracha. He says as follows. There's a midrash in Parashat Bereshit. The midrash says, Asara shenere avon yerdu la'olam. There were 10 years of famine that came down to the world. The first one was in the times of Adam Rishon, Arura Adama Ba'avurecha, and so on and so forth. The midrash lists the 10 famines that came to the world. The last one, which the midrash says is the worst of all, the last one is in Yemot HaMashiach, which the the Navi says in Amos, Lo ra'av lalechem, velo tzama lamayim, ki im lishmoa devar Hashem. The last famine, the last hunger in the world is not a physical hunger, it's a spiritual hunger, right? Not a hunger for bread and not a thirst for water, but to hear the word of Hashem. So the Panovich Rav, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he said, what's the problem? Midrash makes it seem so bad that it's a hunger and it's the worst one, and ikvetadim shicha. What's so bad? People are hungry and thirsty to hear the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What can ever be better than that? Shtabach Shemo. People are chozer b'tshuva, and people are eager, right? They're on fire. Anywhere you go, they want to tell me what's, right? They want to hear the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It seems like there's nothing better than that, but it seems from the context of the Midrash that what? It's pretty bad. What can be bad about it?
They make up their own halacha.
And he says beautifully, and how true it is. Says the Panovich Rav. Did you ever see a person lo alinu v'lo alechem in a hunger? When a person's in a hunger, what do you eat? Anything that comes your way. Fresh, rotten, eaten. It is food. It is edible. It's not whatever it is, anything that you can get a drop of nutrient, a drop of nutrition from, you eat it. So too says the Panovich Rav, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Bimot HaMashiach. There's going to be such a hunger for the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for spirituality, that people aren't going to know the difference between what's real food and what's fake food. Anything, a person can come and start, the halacha is like this and like that, and this is what Chacham Ovadia said, and this is what Rav Eliashiv said. He starts being Gdol Ador, he starts being, right, shooting from the hip, poskim, and people don't know any better because they're in a hunger, and they start, eat more, and they don't know that what they're eating is poison. They don't know that it's wrong, that it's lies. He says that's the problem in the last generation. That's why it's going to be so hard. Although, Baruch Hashem, we have that awakening, we have that movement of teshuvah and thirst for the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But a person has to hope and pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he's zocheh, that he merits hearing the truth of the Torah from a person who's true, from a person who knows the truth of the Torah, from a person who doesn't warp the halacha, from a person who doesn't misquote the halacha, from a person who doesn't say wrong things in the name of people. That is the real zechut in ikvetadim shicha. So we have to pray. Bezat Hashem Rabotai, you see, that's all I try to do. That's why everything, Baruch Hashem Yishtabach Shemo, Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the zechut. Everything is sourced. No shooting from the hip. Everything, Shulchan Aruch, Siman, Sa'if, Gemara, Daf, Rishonim, Poskim, everything is well sourced. Why? Because that's the emet. When you see the emet in front of you, when you see the Poskim, then you know, Baruch Hashem. When you come, Baruch Hashem, I'm happy everybody comes to the shiurim, listens to the shiurim, because that, besides for hearing Divrei Torah, that gives you the ability to start differentiating. You're able to make havdalah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to give us a zechut to make havdalah. Lehavdil ben kodesh lechol. To be able to tell the difference between emet and sheker. That's what we're here for. That's the real avodah of ikvetadim shicha, says the Panovich Rav B'Shem HaMidrash. I thank you all for coming. Bezrat Hashem, next week, we hope to see everybody again. We are concluding the series on kashrut. Next week will be a recap, a hands-on recap, a workshop of all of the halachot that we spoke about, hands-on, how to apply all of the dinim of basar chalak and yashan and pat Yisrael and bishul Yisrael and chalav Yisrael in the outside world, in the workplace and in restaurants, in homes, in your home, in other people's homes. Be'ezrat Hashem, hands-on, practical shiur. And Be'ezrat Hashem, the week after, we'll start already with Purim. But that's for next week. We'll wrap up the shiur. Thank you for listening. Baruch Adonai le'olam v'le'amen. Rabbi Chananel Kasha Omer, ימצא הקדוש ברוך הוא בזכות את ישראל. לפיכך רבנן תורה מצוות שנאמר.